Your flashlight beam cuts through the midnight canopy, but when it hits the clearing, the light simply stops. It does not bounce off the bark of the ancient pines, and it does not illuminate the dew-slicked grass. Instead, you are staring at a hole in the universe, a three-dimensional silhouette shaped like a wolf, standing perfectly still. There is no fur, no glint in the eyes, and no muscle definition. It is a wandering nullity, a creature that has become a living vacuum for every photon in the environment. This is not a trick of the shadows or a failure of your vision. This is the final stage of a biological anomaly that has begun to delete the visual world. The air around the creature feels unnaturally cold, not because of the weather, but because even the heat radiation is being pulled into that absolute ink-stained skin. The creature isn't hiding in the darkness, it has become the darkness. The first reports were dismissed as mass hysteria or optical illusions. Hikers in the Pacific Northwest spoke of missing patches in the scenery, as if someone had taken a pair of scissors to the forest and cut out the wildlife. They described birds that looked like jagged ink blots falling through the sky, and deer that moved like two-dimensional cutouts from a charcoal sheet. Initially, researchers looked toward environmental pollutants or rare fungal infections affecting pigmentation. But as the frequency of sightings increased, the reality of the shadow eater virus began to take hold. It is a pathogen that doesn't just kill, it reorganizes the molecular structure of the host's exterior to achieve a state of perfect light absorption. It creates a biological surface that reflects 0% of the visible spectrum. To look at an infected animal is to feel a sense of physical vertigo as your brain struggles to process an object that has no depth, no texture, and no color. In the heart of the restricted wildlife zones, the ecosystem has transformed into a gallery of moving ghosts. Imagine a predator, perhaps a mountain lion, stalking through the brush. It carries no tawny camouflage to blend with the dry grass. It is a walking abyss, invisible against the dark earth and detectable only by the snapping of twigs or the heavy rhythmic sound of its breathing. When these creatures move in front of a light source, they don't cast a shadow. They absorb the light directly into their bodies, leaving a flickering trail of visual static in the observer's retina. The terror of the prey animals is palpable, yet they too are falling victim. A herd of elk might appear as a cluster of black holes grazing in a meadow, their presence signaled only by the way they block out the stars behind them as they move their heads. The forest has become a place where the hunter and the hunted are equally invisible, playing out a silent drama in a world of obsidian glass. The virus works with a silent, meticulous efficiency that defies conventional biology. Once the pathogen enters the bloodstream, it targets the melanocytes and the keratin structures of the skin, scales, or feathers. It doesn't just darken them, it restructures them into microscopic, tube-like forests that trap light particles, bouncing them deep into the tissue until their energy is entirely dissipated as heat. For the animal, the transition is physically transformative, but mentally isolating. There is evidence suggesting that as the body becomes a void, the nervous system remains fully functional. The animal can still see, hear, and feel, but it has become a ghost to the rest of the world. It is a prisoner within a body that the sun can no longer find. The creature exists in a state of sensory paradox. It is more physically present than ever, absorbing the very energy of the world, yet it is visually non-existent. As the infection crossed the threshold into domestic spaces, the horror became intimate. People reported their pets transforming overnight. A dog lying on a rug became a patch of nothingness that family members would trip over because they simply could not perceive its boundaries. The most unsettling aspect is the silence that follows the transformation. Animals that become shadows tend to stop vocalizing, as if they instinctively understand that their new nature is one of total erasure. They move through houses like living stains, their presence known only by a cold draft or the sensation of invisible fur brushing against a leg. The psychological toll on owners is immense. They watch a beloved companion vanish into a shape of pure, empty night, while it is still breathing, still seeking affection, and still waiting to be fed. You reach out to pet your cat, and your hand simply disappears into a silhouette that feels warm but looks like a hole in the sofa. The human transition begins not with a fever or a cough, but with a terrifying loss of depth. You might look at your hand while drinking coffee and notice that the lines on your palm are fading, not because the skin is healing, but because the surface is no longer reflecting enough light to show detail. Within days, the limb begins to resemble a charcoal sketch. The sensation is described as a heavy, cold numbness, as if the skin is becoming denser, pulling inward, becoming an anchor. As the virus spreads across the torso and face, your identity is literally erased. Your partner can no longer see the curve of your nose, the shape of your lip, or the emotion in your eyes. They see only a person-shaped gap in the room. You are standing right in front of them, speaking their name, but they are looking into an abyss that has no face. Consider the case of a young architect named Elias and his wife, Elena. Elias was among the first in his city to document the progression. It started with his fingerprints. He noticed they were becoming smooth, not to the touch, but to the eye. He began to lose the ability to see his own reflection in the morning. Within a week, Elias was a silhouette in a tailored suit. Elena would wake up in the middle of the night, reaching out to find him, only to see a man-shaped hole in the sheets where her husband should be. She described the experience as trying to love a ghost that still had weight. When they sat for dinner, she couldn't see the fatigue in his eyes or the slight smile he used to give her. She was talking to a void that spoke with Elias's voice. Elias described the experience in his journals as the ultimate claustrophobia. He could feel the sun on his face, a searing heat because his skin was now a perfect radiator. But when he looked in a mirror, he saw only a dark cutout of a man. He began to feel like a stranger haunting his own life. The more he absorbed the world's light, the less he felt like he belonged to it. He was a solid mass of ink, a heavy presence that occupied space but refused to be witnessed. Elena tried to stay, tried to hold on to the tactile reality of him, but the visual absence began to erode her mind. She would find herself staring at the place where his face should be, her eyes searching for a feature, a wrinkle, a sign of life, only to find an unyielding matte black surface. The conflict wasn't one of anger, but of a slow, agonizing disconnection. He was right there, his heart beating against her palm, yet he was miles away, hidden behind an impenetrable biological veil. The most harrowing part of the human experience is the preservation of consciousness. Unlike many viruses that attack the brain, the shadow eater virus leaves the mind intact, trapped behind a veil of absolute negation. Patients describe the feeling of being buried alive within their own skin. They can feel the warmth of a nearby lamp. They can feel the breeze from an open window. But when they look at their own arm, there is nothing there but a void. The loss of visual feedback leads to a profound disconnection from reality. It is a state of sensory deprivation where the world can see you only as a shadow, and you can see the world, but you can no longer see yourself. The mind begins to drift, untethered from the visual cues that confirm one's existence in physical space. How do you maintain your sanity when your own reflection is just a dark cutout in the mirror? Communication is the first casualty of this biological eclipse. Human interaction relies heavily on facial expressions, the slight narrowing of eyes, the twitch of a mouth, or the flushing of cheeks. When a person becomes a shadow, they lose the ability to convey empathy, anger, or fear through their features. A conversation with an infected individual is like speaking into a deep well. You hear the voice, but the source is a featureless vacuum. This has led to a total breakdown in social cohesion. Isolation has become the only defense, not just to prevent the physical spread of the virus, but to protect the psyche from the soul-crushing experience of being invisible to those you love. Communities have gone silent. Residents retreat into their homes, shuttering windows to avoid seeing the dark shapes that now roam the streets, looking for a light they can no longer reflect. The scientific struggle to contain the anomaly is hampered by the nature of the virus itself. How do you study a pathogen that turns its host into a perfect optical trap? Traditional microscopy is nearly impossible when the samples absorb the very light needed to observe them. Researchers must rely on infrared imaging and tactile sensors to map the progression of the disease. There are reports from high-containment laboratories of an event horizon effect, where the light absorption becomes so total that it starts to interfere with electronic equipment, causing cameras to glitch and sensors to fail. It is as if the virus is not just a biological entity, but a fundamental shift in the way matter interacts with energy. Some theorists suggest the virus is converting light into a form of biological mass, making the infected heavier and more substantial even as they disappear from sight. In the wild, the behavior of the shadow animals has begun to shift in ways that suggest a new, dark intelligence. They have started to congregate in areas of high light intensity, almost as if they are drawn to the energy they now consume. Huge shadow herds have been seen standing in open fields during solar peaks, their bodies shivering as they absorb the torrential downpour of photons. It is a haunting sight. Hundreds of three-dimensional voids standing perfectly still under a bright blue sky, sucking the light out of the air until the field looks like it is covered in a moving, ink-dark carpet. They are no longer part of the natural cycle of life. They have become something else entirely. A new kingdom of life that thrives on the erasure of the visual world. They do not bask in the sun. They devour it. This dietary shift has led to localized cooling. In areas where the infected congregate, the ambient temperature can drop by 10 degrees or more. The shadow frost is a phenomenon where the air becomes brittle and cold because the very heat of the environment is being siphoned into the skins of the unseeable. Imagine walking through a forest in mid-July and seeing your breath fog in the air, only to realize the cold is radiating from a cluster of deer-shaped holes in the brush. The ecosystem is being starved of the energy it needs to function. Plants near these herds wither and die, not from infection, but from a lack of sunlight, as the shadow creatures stand over them, claiming every ray of light for themselves. The terror of the shadow eater is not in the pain it causes, but in the existential threat of being forgotten while still alive. It is a slow, methodical deletion of the self. As the virus reaches its final stages in a human host, even the internal membranes begin to shift. The eyes turn into twin pits of darkness, absorbing the very light they used to see. Eventually, the host becomes a perfect black statue, a living monument to nothingness. They continue to move, they continue to breathe, and they continue to crave human contact, but they are effectively removed from the light-based reality that defines the human experience. They exist in the between, a state of being where they are physically present but visually absent, a ghost that can still hold your hand but has no face to return your smile. You can feel their breath on your neck, but when you turn around, there is only the empty air and a patch of darkness where the light should be. The social implications are devastating. We have become a society of the sighted fearing the unseen. Parents look at their children's hands every morning, searching for the first signs of the fade. We have replaced our mirrors with tactile markers, learning to recognize our loved ones by the texture of their hair or the specific rhythm of their gait. But even that is a losing battle. As the skin becomes more efficient at absorbing light, it also seems to become more efficient at absorbing sound and heat. The infected become quieter, their footsteps muffled by a body that seems to swallow vibrations. They become colder to the touch, as if they are sucking the warmth right out of your fingers. To love someone who is infected is to watch them slowly retreat into a personal, impenetrable night, until even the memory of their face begins to blur. Elias eventually stopped writing in his journal. His last entry was not a sentence, but a smudge of charcoal that he had tried to shape into his signature. Elena found him standing in the garden one afternoon, his body a stark, jagged hole against the vibrant green of the lawn. She walked up to him and tried to find his hand, but as her fingers entered the space where his skin was, she felt a coldness so profound it made her heart stutter. There was no texture, no skin, just a velvet void that seemed to pull at her own warmth. He didn't turn to look at her. Perhaps he couldn't, or perhaps he no longer understood the concept of looking. He was just absorbing the afternoon sun, a silent pillar of night in a world that was still desperately trying to stay bright. As we look to the future, the question remains whether this is a temporary plague or a permanent evolution. If the virus continues to jump between species with such ease, we may be heading toward a dark Earth scenario. This would be a world where the oceans are filled with shadowfish that leave trails of ink in the water. The skies are crossed by shadow birds that look like holes in the clouds, and the cities are populated by shadow people. It would be a world defined by sounds, smells, and touches, but a world where the sun serves only to illuminate a vast, growing emptiness. The beauty of a sunset or the vibrant color of a mountain flower would become a distant memory, replaced by a universal, matte black stillness. We would be a planet of the blind, not because our eyes failed, but because the world itself stopped reflecting the light. The fear is that we are witnessing the closing of an eye. For millions of years, life has evolved to see and be seen, to use color as a language and light as a guide. The Shadow Eater virus is the undoing of that entire history. It is a return to the primordial dark, not through the absence of light, but through the perfection of its consumption. Every infected creature is a shutter being pulled down, a light being extinguished in a grand, cosmic hallway. And as you sit in your room tonight, watching the shadows dance on the wall, you might find yourself wondering if that one particularly dark patch in the corner is just a trick of the lamp. You might wonder if it is something that has finally learned how to eat the light. You might reach out to touch it, only to find that your fingers don't stop where they should, but disappear into a cold, velvet void. The silence of the shadow-infected world is perhaps its most chilling attribute. Without the visual noise of the world, every other sense becomes hypersensitive. You begin to hear the heartbeat of the void standing next to you in the grocery store line. You feel the heat radiating from the black shape that used to be your neighbor. The world becomes a place of intense, terrifying proximity. You can't see how far away the danger is, or even if the danger is looking at you. All you know is that the darkness is no longer an empty space. It is populated. It is hungry, and it is waiting for the last photon to fade so it can finally be at peace in the total, unyielding black. We are learning to navigate by sound and by the heat of our own bodies, becoming creatures of the cave once more. The psychological breaking point comes when you realize that light is no longer your ally. In the past, we turned on the lights to banish the shadows. Now, turning on a light only serves to highlight the presence of the things that consume it. A bright room becomes a terrifying landscape of jagged, three-dimensional holes. The more light you provide, the more obvious the infection becomes. We have started living in the dimness, hoping that if we don't provide enough light to be consumed, the shadows will leave us alone. But they don't. They are drawn to the faint glow of a candle, the dying embers of a fire, or the warmth of a human body. They are the ultimate consumers, and we are the ultimate source. There is no vaccine for a shadow. There is no cure for a void. We are adjusting our lives to the cadence of the dark, developing new ways to navigate a world that is being systematically erased. We hold on to each other's hands tighter, not just for comfort, but to prove to ourselves that we are still there, that we haven't yet been consumed by the light-trapping skin that is slowly creeping up our own arms. We are the last generation to remember what it was like to see a face, to know the specific shade of a loved one's eyes, and to stand in the sun without disappearing. We are the curators of a dying light, clutching at the memories of color before they are sucked into the obsidian skin of our neighbors. The light is getting dimmer, not because the sun is dying, but because there are more of them every day. The shadows are no longer cast by the light. They are the things that have survived it. They are the animals that were once vibrant and the people who were once known. Now, they are just shapes, voids, holes in the tapestry of our lives. And as the darkness grows, we realize that the greatest threat was never what was hiding in the shadows. The threat was the shadow itself, and it has finally found its way inside. The world is not ending with a bang, but with a quiet, absolute, and all-consuming darkness that leaves nothing behind but the memory of the light. You look at your hand one last time, watching the fingerprints vanish into a smooth, black surface, and you realize that the dark isn't coming for you. You are the dark. And finally, you are perfectly, invisibly alone.